The summary I show here is meant to lay out for you just how opposite these two styles are, which is actually a big help in remembering what each is about. Just compare and contrast. I also added a new line and a footnote about the fine art element. Your review of modernism will have clarified for you the connection between abstraction and modernism. Now here we'll review the connection between Art Deco and Cubism. But first, what is the difference between the two, abstract art and Cubist art? Abstraction is non-figurative. It does not depict any identifiable object other than geometric forms like circles and squares. Cubism, on the other hand, is figurative. Even if it's difficult to make out what the subject of the painting or the sculpture is, it is an image of something, a portrait, a still life, etc. And Cubist forms are usually not pure geometric forms, but more like broken shards, angular pieces, like the image in a broken mirror. These jagged, irregular forms, which often have a kind of primitive woodcut type of quality, are what we more often find in Art Deco. Now, that's not to say that we never see a reference to pure geometric form expressed in Art Deco, a crisp circle, for example, or smooth rectangles and squares. Sleek, simple geometric forms lend themselves nicely to the design of objects, especially if your goal is to modernize traditional forms. However, the modernists in general were not inspired by Cubism, for the most part because it was not abstract and the forms were not pure geometric forms. In terms of Cubist color, while the earliest groundbreaking works by Picasso and his circle were executed in greens and earth tones and metallic colors, the work of others was much more colorful, and it was those artists who became involved in interior design. So while we do see the use of metallic and earth tone shades in Art Deco, more often we find intense, eye-catching, attractive color. For the modernists, while some abstract art did use color, the modernists avoided it. And you know why, right? If not, go back and find out. I pointed you toward it in the review of the Masters houses. So now, before we start looking at the images, get yourself situated. What is the name of the style we're about to deal with? Where did it emerge? During what time period did it emerge? What are the defining characteristics of this style? And why those characteristics? What caused them? What do they mean? What statement are these designers making through these characteristics? What philosophy are they expressing? And to ID the characteristics, where do we begin? We look at form, ornament, material, and production. This poster represents almost every single important point and source of inspiration regarding Art Deco, and I'll pose some questions to help you review this material. But if you've answered the opening questions successfully, you already know the answers. First and foremost, regarding the what and why of this style. If you recall, the defining characteristics of Art Deco are many, but they can all be divided into two main categories that not only define the style, but also the key to its international and enduring success. What are those two categories? Here's a hint. They are two apparent opposites. Next, go to the page in the PowerPoint where I list the many different ways these two basic characteristics were expressed. How many of them can you ID in this poster image? And another hint, don't overlook the obvious. Don't forget what I just said about Cubism and Art Deco. Do you see evidence of that here? And of course the poster itself, what is it advertising? And why was this event so important? Ah, my favorite chair. This one is easy. What makes this chair Art Deco? And remember, for this and all others, consider first the two main categories, the two opposites you ID'd above, then look for evidence of those two things. How is the form Art Deco? Not sure? Compare it to a modernist chair. That should point you to the right answer. How is the ornament Art Deco? That should be fresh in your memory from my intro here and your study of the previous image. What materials were used to make this chair? What materials do you see here? And how do they define this chair as Art Deco? And of course, production. How would this chair have been made? It's central to French Art Deco philosophy. Now that you have down the fundamentals of Art Deco, giving the defining characteristics of this space and the items in it should be easy. See if you can do that confidently. Then, of course, what is this room? Where was it? And why is it so important in design history? Now that you have down the fundamentals of Art Deco, giving the defining characteristics of this space and the items in it should be easy. See if you can do that confidently. Then, of course, what is this room? Where was it? And why is it so important in the history of design? We began this exercise with a chart that compared the many ways in which Art Deco and modernism were totally opposed to each other. But of course, as I often remind you, not everything in life or design is black or white. Most things exist on the continuum, somewhere in between. And the design produced by the group that formed in France circa 1930, the UAM, represents this. I believe I even created a little diagram in the PowerPoint illustrating this. While many French designers were 100% committed to strict Art Deco philosophy, everyone was aware of what was happening in Germany, of the new style emerging there we now call modernism. And of course, in Le Corbusier, the French had their own modernists right in their midst. So quite naturally, certain architects and designers were intrigued by modernism. They were interested in it as a forward-looking, realistic interpretation of the modern world. But at the same time, they were not comfortable with the cold, sterile, socialist aspects of it. So what did they do? They began working in a style that combined the two, mixing industrial materials and pure geometric forms with more traditional, even luxurious materials and forms. Glass House is an excellent example of this in both architecture and interior design. Just as you did with the Ruhlmann interior, see if you can identify how and where these two opposing tendencies meet in this space. After the 1925 exhibition in Paris, Art Deco became an international phenomenon, and in this image we see an excellent example of how it expressed in America. But of course, as we know, design is a reflection of context. It cannot not be. So while we see characteristics here that reflect the French origins of the style, and many of the things on that long list from the PowerPoint, we also see things here that are American. What about this piece reflects American life and values? Be sure you can ID the two sets of characteristics, French and American. Also, since America did not participate in the 1925 exhibition, how were they exposed to this new style? How did they learn about it? Now, just as the UAM is a hybrid of French Art Deco and modernism, so in America, streamlining is a combination of Art Deco and another source of influence, not modernism, but industry. This is America, remember. So even though the aesthetics of streamlining and the UAM are similar, the sources of influence are different. So you need to establish a basic understanding of streamlining before you can ID and explain the characteristics. And the most important questions you need to answer in order to get an understanding of streamlining are these. What does the term streamlining mean, and where does this term come from? The answer to these questions will tell you what the most important defining characteristic of streamlining is and what makes it an American phenomenon. The answer is directly related to the form, not the details, but the overall form. The term streamlining itself gives you a clue. When you hear that term, what kind of form does it suggest to you? It has to do with removing all superfluous details, with smoothing out surfaces to make them more aerodynamic. While streamlined furniture can be made completely from industrial materials, just as in the UAM, we often see them combined with materials more commonly found in the more French form of Art Deco, like the dressing table of the previous image. In this table, we see just that, the industrial combined with the more traditional and/or ornamental. So, in closing, what are the defining characteristics of this table? That is, what tells you this is an example of streamlining? And where do those characteristics come from? What caused them? What is their source of influence? What do they tell us about American life at this time?